Hello there, everyone. This is Yuma speaking, and I see that there are more and more people joining. So feel free to chat with each other, connect with each other, go to the networking tables, and just 3 or 4 minutes before we kick off the show on the event on recruiting on GitHub and Stack Overflow. I see that there are a lot of people from the US. Quite some people from, let me see, where we're from, San Francisco, Sweden, US, the Netherlands is represented as well. Good to see. Give us a shout out where you're from, what your city is. Then we know who's here. And if you can hear me in the first place, because that's always a good test, of course. Thanks, Peter. Hey, Alex. Hello, Zane from Edinburgh. Amsterdam, 2 times Amsterdam. Barcelona, Spain, must still be beautiful sun there. Not in Amsterdam, I can tell you. Stockholm, also on the colder side right now probably, but beautiful place. Summer never ends. Lucky you. Amsterdam again. Amsterdam is well represented today. Pristina, that's India, I suppose. Not sure. Wild guess. South Africa. Awesome. Cape Town or another place, Galen? Cape Town. Best place in South Africa, for sure. Definitely. Also, summer starting now in Cape Town, right? If you're from the Netherlands or Scandinavia or any other place in Europe, basically, I would definitely recommend having an additional summer in Cape Town when it's very, very cold on this side. Summer starts right now in Cape Town. Hi, Craig. I'll just take a few more minutes for other people to join. I see that we're already with quite a group, so that's great. Mainly tech recruiters, but also some more generic roles. And I suppose that's also valuable, of course, to consider GitHub and Stack Overflow, because your team might also be using it and might be useful to find tech talent there. Amsterdam, David in the house. Let me check on our YouTube live stream, if that's still going on. But this is where the real magic happens, because we have a little bit more interaction in the AirMeet event. So also feel free today to drop your questions, suggestions, tips from your side, because I'm not the only one who knows stuff about GitHub recruiting and Stack Overflow recruiting. We get a lot of knowledge today here in the event, so feel free to share. Okay, we'll give it 1 more minute before we kick off. Until all your friends are here. I see a lot of people coming in still. We are with about, I think we're going to hit the 100 today. So we also do these smaller events to have a little bit more interaction. with the audience, and let's see if we can hit the 100 today. Maybe it's going to be a little bit less. Another one from Cape Town, Matthew, welcome. Okay, great. I don't want to have the people who are in time for the event waiting too long, so we'll start. What I'm gonna walk you through today is recruiting on GitHub and Stack Overflow, two platforms that typically are missed by recruiters, even technical recruiters. So don't feel stupid if you don't recruit on GitHub and Stack Overflow yet, because I can tell you from our data and experience that 95% of even the tech recruiters are not using GitHub and Stack Overflow frequently. And that primarily has to do with the fact that it's a little bit technical, literally, to source those platforms. So what I'm going to show you today is two methods to go through GitHub and Stack Overflow. And we'll focus on finding people in the first place, screening the profiles on those platforms that we found, and then additionally also getting contact details. So finding verified contact details that we can obviously use to reach out, and those will be primarily email addresses. So I'm going to share my screen in 5 minutes, but before I do that, because this is going to be a practical session, I'm really going to show you how to do these kind of things so you can do it yourself right after the session, but also share your newly gained skills and knowledge with your teammates. GitHub is a huge platform where 80 million developers are on. So 80 million developers on GitHub. That's more developers than you can find on LinkedIn, and you can test that. On LinkedIn, you can find around 50 to 60 million software developers, including Boolean combinations. On GitHub, 80 million. Stack Overflow has 20 million. So that is around 100 million people in total to source from. So that's a huge talent pool that's often missed out by a lot of recruiters, by even the best technical sources, because there's a lot of data to process. And I'm going to show you two ways of finding people and finding contact details on those platforms. One is the actual X-ray method, so using Google to find our profiles on GitHub and Stack Overflow. And the second one is using dedicated software. That's our own software that we've built. That's HeroHunt.ai to find specifically profiles from GitHub and Stack Overflow, including contact details. I want to show you both ways because I always want to provide several alternatives. There is a third way. You can also search directly through GitHub and Stack Overflow for users, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it because we've tested it a lot and you can't really find all the profiles that you want, and the search options are very limited. So let's dive into this. I'm going to show you stuff. So please let me know if you actually see my screen once I share the screen. Just let me know in the chat. We're going to see an infinity loop now of our own of ourselves. Yes, Peter, thanks. Let's check. Some thumbs up. All clear. Awesome. We are with around, let's say 50, 60 people, and some other people will be joining probably. So Mary, thanks. You can see it as well. So let's start today's session. I'm a practical guy, so I'm just going to show you everything that we do ourselves and that we have done before, also from a GitHub and Stack Overflow recruiting perspective. I'm now going to switch my screen. So let me know once more if you actually see my Google screen now. And then I switch back very quickly just to check that we're clear. Okay, awesome. Thank you. So we see Google. Obviously, most of you know some of the basics, at least, of X-ray searching. So we can use that same technique of X-ray searching, which is basically searching for talent in Google, right? We can use that same technique to find actual GitHub and Stack Overflow profiles. So that's what I'm gonna show you today. There are some specifics in terms of operators that you have to include in your X-ray search, and also in terms of keywords that you can use or should not use in your Google X-ray searches, specifically for GitHub and Stack Overflow. So I'm going to walk you through. The first thing that we're going to do is actually go to GitHub search. So we're going to search the platform GitHub, which, as I told you, has 80 million users on there. So 80 million technically oriented users who are actually sharing their code repositories on GitHub, the platform. So they are actually sharing code, their own code base, make it public, and therefore we can also search in that code base. And Google has also partly indexed that information, so we can actually find what those users are typically about in terms of technology skills. So we start obviously with the site operator to indicate in Google that we're going to search in github.com. So this site operator you will also use in a LinkedIn search, in the LinkedIn X-ray search, right? So in GitHub that won't be different. Just don't use HTTPS or something in front, just the domain. So we have github.com. Then there's something specific that you have to add to this Google X-ray search. So, and that's the actual blog or report, exact match in Google. Why do we add this? Because this is something that appears on a profile on GitHub, and otherwise we won't be able to find those profiles. So we have blog or report that we're adding to the X-ray search to find specifically profiles and not necessarily documentation or any other type of web pages. Then we obviously have our keywords, and I'm just going to grab a role here. We can also use other roles. So if you have a role that you want to share the link to the job description with, we can actually test that today. So feel free to share a link of your job description. Then we might use that for our next round, and that's Stack Overflow searching, for an example. And also for the other methods, we can use that. So from here, we include the actual keywords. So for an example, we said blockchain as a required keyword. So we don't do anything with that in terms of OR statements. And then we look at the required keywords. And we have, for an example, smart contracts, crypto, which is basically very similar to blockchain. Solidity, which is a more specific keyword used in blockchain architecture and development. TypeScript and Python. So I'm just going to grab these, and I also see DeFi. So what I can do here is actually include this separated by OR statements. So it has to include either Solidity, TypeScript, or Python, and blockchain for sure. Otherwise, the profile won't pop up. And we need a location, obviously, as well. So this will be New York. So since it's two words, New York, we'll hit New York, type New York like this, and then we'll just hit enter. So we have the site operator, the block and report addition, the required keyword, the optional keywords, which you can play around with. Obviously, we could also add, for example, Solidity as a required keyword. Then we would just put it behind blockchain, and we have the location, New York. So we're getting 323 results in New York for a blockchain developer. And you will see that Google also highlights, obviously, like the Google search, the most important keywords that you included. And from there, we can actually start opening these profiles and start screening the profiles if we want to check if they're actually in line with our own job description. So what I do here is I use a Chrome extension. It's called Link Clump. And that way I can open up these 10 different profiles all at the same time. And then I don't have to wait before they're loaded, So I will also add this one in the chat. It's a free Chrome extension. We didn't develop it. Someone else did, but it works great. So definitely use that. Oh, yes, Sophie, the session is recorded. So you will actually receive a recording after the event has finished. So I just shared link lump, the Chrome extension, in the chat. So feel free to add that to your Chrome extensions. So here we have the actual top 10 profiles that Google returned. Obviously, Google ranks the profiles based on the match that we have with our search string that we just included. So we have, for an example, Manu Chimso. He's a developer, he has a GitHub profile, and he has a lot of information. I already see a lot of information in his about page. So this is something that you have to know from GitHub. The developers on GitHub can, sort of design their about, so their README file, so their about page themselves, and include all these kind of visuals and focus points on certain technologies or achievements that they've used, their stats, for an example. And with that, they can show, okay, I'm really active on this platform. And usually they do this to communicate with developers, but you also see a lot of developers on GitHub who are actually actively addressing the fact that they're hireable, for an example, and they are talking to recruiters, so to say. So they say, for example, if you want to hire me, go to this link. If you want to find out more about my work, my portfolio, go to this link. And that's a lot of valuable information that you can gain from those developers. I want to show you one more thing on the GitHub profile, and then we'll move on to actually finding contact details. So this section, the contributions section, that will always be there, no matter how the individual developer designed their about page. This will always be visible. So you see 553 contributions in the last year. A contribution is usually a fork or some kind of action on the GitHub platform, like a code repository share or a commit, that indicates that they're active on GitHub. And definitely if they're typically open source developers who like the idea of sharing the code with the world that they've built, this will be very active. In some cases, it will be less active, but more information will be included here on the static page because some developers don't choose to open source their code repositories all the time. Still, those profiles can also be very valuable. So if we like what we see, we can actually go into the repositories. And just for your reference, I will also show you the other profiles, so you know how they can actually differ in terms of activity, but also amount of information that they included. For example, Katerina didn't commit or wasn't really active a lot in the last year. That's valuable information from a recruiting perspective, but still she has some repositories which could indicate what her focus is from a development perspective. Same for Parmar. He's a little bit more active. He has a lot of information on his page, and the other profiles will have a similar kind of variance to them. We'll go to back to this profile of Manu Chim. I think Manu Chim is his shorter version of his name. So we like his profile. We actually want to reach out to him because we see he has the required skills for us. Then we do a little hack, and that's to go to the repositories to actually find the email address. We go to the repositories. We'll go to one of his repositories. We click on that. We'll go to his commits, and we'll click the commit details. So we'll just go to the commit page, and this goes very quickly. The session is recorded, so you can also always go back to this part. But we go to the commit page, and we add .batch to the actual URL. Adding this part to the URL .batch will actually send you to a more code-like view of the page, of the information. And here you can always find, or in most cases at least, not always, but in most cases, you will find the actual email address of the candidate we are referring to. So .batch in the actual link on the commit page, You can also try it right now for yourself. And we have one question that I would like to answer. Why does it show these people when we search for New York-based people? This person is from Nigeria, and the other person, I think, was from St. Petersburg. So they probably have some details about New York on their page. This is a very good question. So we're searching with Google X-ray. So that means that we don't have access to specific locations, specific data that we can include in the X-ray search. So the X-ray search in that perspective is a little bit limited, but they probably have New York somewhere on the page mentioned as a location where they have been working from, or where they're actually from, or something related to New York. I will show you in the second method that I will show you. We do actually have a location field that we can include. And this is the question that you have is already a very important actual limitation of doing the X-ray search for GitHub. But I'll show you how to do it in the alternative approach. And then we can actually find people based on location. So we have the actual email address here, and based on that email address, we can obviously start reaching out. So we copy that email address, we go back to the profile of Manu Jim and go back to his overview to know what he's actually about, and then refer, obviously, good practice is to refer to what you have seen on their profile, and then from that, send them a highly personalized message based on, okay, I've seen your profile on GitHub, I've seen your top skills, I've seen that you have been focusing on DeFi, Web 3.0, dApps, so I would definitely be interested in getting in touch with you. Based on this, you can actually find almost any user on GitHub. It has definitely some limitations, like the location filter that is already mentioned. Also, it is quite a cumbersome and time-consuming process, but you are very targeted and you have a lot of details that a lot of other recruiters don't have. So that's something to take into account. The additional value of sourcing GitHub and Stack Overflow is always that you're fishing in a pool that's not overfished yet, like it is the case in LinkedIn always. You have different information, you find different profiles, because a lot of these developers are not on LinkedIn, or at least not actively, and not with a lot of data, so you can't really find them. So in these cases, GitHub and Stack Overflow provide a very rich source of untouched talent, basically. That's GitHub. We'll just go through Stack Overflow quickly, and I'm just going to check if we have some questions that are additional to the things that we've already addressed. Any tips on how to get around if the dev is using a unique GitHub commit email address? That's a good question. And I have a workaround for you, and that's actually the second method. So I will show you, Craig, and all of the rest of you, how you can do this. But first, let me please explain the Stack Overflow X-ray search, because that's a little bit different. We'll just use the same search here, and then we'll use, because I've seen that someone shared their job description for Truecaller. So we'll use that in the second method actually to find people. For the Stack Overflow search string in X-ray, in the Google X-ray search, we'll use obviously stackoverflow.com, but here we'll add /users. So here we do have an identifier that indicates that we have a page that we're addressing. So that's /users, just like you have with LinkedIn. It's always LinkedIn/in if you are on a person's profile. In GitHub's case, that's not the case, but in Stack Overflow, that is the case. So we have Stack Overflow /users, just like we have with LinkedIn. So we also don't have to add the additional keyword string here, like block or report or something like that. So we'll just use the similar keywords, and we'll do the search here. We find a little bit less profiles for New York, just because the simple fact that Stack Overflow has less users and sometimes also has less data, but that depends a little bit on the role that you're sourcing for. Like if it's about developers, you'll definitely find more profiles and more up-to-date profiles on GitHub. But if it's about technical specialists, for an example, that have to get questions, a lot of questions answered, then you can definitely find them on Stack Overflow a lot. So this is the search string for Stack Overflow, and it's a little bit more simple, and you can play around with these keywords, obviously. And also here, take into account that, again, like we addressed, the location will not always be the location field of the user, but it can be anywhere on the profile. Like here, for example, New York, NY, USA. This user will be from New York, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the case for the rest of the profiles. Most of them are. So you see New York City, for an example. But in a lot of cases, just like on LinkedIn as well, in some cases, they will mention a different city or location in the location field than they actually have on their current job. And that information can be anywhere on the profile. So that's Stack Overflow. How you go about finding email addresses on Stack Overflow that are not listed on Stack Overflow is typically using the GitHub approach that we just did for Manachim, and then doing that in a cross-reference perspective. So we cross-reference this profile, which is simply finding CAD on GitHub, and then from there we can do the same process for finding the actual email address. So we go to React Native Gym, one of his repositories, we go to commit, we go to its commit details, we'll add .patch and see if we can find the email address there, and yes, we can. So we have an email address that they personally use. An additional important note is that they are personally using this to communicate with other developers, for example, but also with recruiters, for example, if they reach out to them. So it's an active email address. You can actually expect your email to be delivered on their email address here, which is very interesting. I'm just going to return to the search, see if we have an additional question. So that's link clump, the Chrome extension. Yes, there we are. Thank you for sharing. If we don't, we have an additional question from Lisa. If we don't find a GitHub profile, how can we find the mail then? I don't really understand your question yet, because we do need some kind of start point to start finding email addresses. Otherwise, we don't know exactly who we're looking for in the first place. But if you could specify that question, I'll definitely get back to that question. So I'll go through the second approach of today to finding developers, but also other technical talent. And that's using dedicated software. And in this case, it's going to be HeroHunt.ai. So this is HeroHunt.ai, and this is software that we have built ourselves. I'm one of the co-founders of this software, and we've built this because we saw that GitHub and Stack Overflow sourcing is a very time-consuming process, and you miss a lot of filters and data that you need to actually target the right people. The location field is a perfect example. Like Google X-Ray has its limitations, and from a location perspective, it's actually most limited. From a keyword perspective, you can do a lot with Google, but from a location perspective, it's kind of limited. Also, from a contact details perspective, it's a very manual process, and that's also why we've automated this process. So, what I just want to show you is how to create a search in HeroHunt and actually find those GitHub and Stack Overflow profiles. Also, have additional information for screening, and then also find verified contact details quickly with the software. There are also other tools that do the same. So that's also good to mention. There are also other tools. So we were not the only one who was able to find GitHub and Stack Overflow profiles. There is a certain selection of tools that can do this. In addition to LinkedIn profiles. So I'll go back to the, and sorry for the infinity loop, that's always annoying, but we have that because I use different screens and tabs and those kind of things. So we have the true color job description shared by Jayasvi. So thanks for sharing that. So that's a senior software engineer backend role that we're going to use to search in HeroHunt.ai. So we're just going to include the job title. So senior software engineer. We can also say senior developer, for example, backend, or senior backend developer. Depends a little bit on which job title you're looking for, but in most cases, and in some cases even, it's helpful to only look for developer, because not everyone will have senior backend developer on their profile just like this. So you can also make a distinction between the exact job title match and not, but that's a detail. For today, we're just going to use a more generic version of the job title that's included in the search. And we say next. We include the actual job description here from start to finish. Everything that's relevant. That's just a paste action. Then we go next. And HeroHunt will actually find those keywords for you from the job description. So you don't have to write those complex Boolean strings, but HeroHunt lists them for you and prioritizes them based on how important the software thinks the information is, or the keywords are. And from there, your keywords, you can always change your keywords. So you can add keywords, for example, from our library or from just free format. You can reprioritize the keywords. So for an example, if we have Java being required, then we'll add that to the required tags. Let's see if that's actually the case. What do we expect from Java, Scala, Play framework? So we can add Java, for example, backend, and then we are quite sure we actually can find them. We can also add Scala, for example. And then we're going to check the location here. That's Stockholm. So I'm just going to work with Java and backend because we also have a quite specific location. And that's something that you have to play around with. So you can't use 8 required keywords and then also have a city, for an example, to match, because there are just no profiles that match that search. So what I always recommend here, but also in the Google X-ray search, is to use 1 or 2 required keywords, especially in the case of GitHub and Stack Overflow, and then do your search. Unless you're searching for a remote role, for example, without the location, then you have a talent pool of 8 billion people, basically. And then you can also be a lot more targeted in your required keywords. So that's an important distinction in how you search. So we have Java backend. This part, so all the nice to have keywords, you can see them as or statements, basically, in your Google, in how they would appear in your Google X-ray search. But in HeroHunt, there's and more information is included because you have all those synonyms. So iOS can have a lot of different ways of writing. .NET can be written out. So all those synonyms are underlying of the intelligence of the software. So you don't have to create extra Boolean searches to account for those synonyms, for example. So from here, we go from Java backend search to next. And then we say Stockholm, it was. You can also do a country-wide search, but in this case, I would choose to search for the actual city. So we say Stockholm. We can also choose the metropolitan area, so that will be the broader surrounding area. And then we have one more step, and that's actually selecting the platforms. So HeroHunt also searches all the LinkedIn profiles, so it literally can find any LinkedIn profile online. But today we're recruiting for GitHub and Stack Overflow, so we choose those platforms. And then we'll just hit search, and from there, HeroHunt will real-time search those platforms, and will give you the best matching profiles based on that search. So this will take around typically 10 seconds in this case, before you actually find the profiles. So this is where we have the job title being an important part of the actual search. So we can say, for an example, because we have looked for a senior backend developer, as you might expect, not a lot of people present themselves as a senior backend developer on GitHub or Stack Overflow. They will have their code repositories and they will have their data, so questions and answer data on Stack Overflow, but they won't necessarily present themselves as if they would present them on a LinkedIn platform, for example. So that's also something to take into account with the information that you include. So just for the ease of it, I'll just create a new search. And we have backend here. Backend we'll just add here. And Java. And then we'll have Stockholm location. Still including all the information. So again, real time, it will search the platforms and will give you back the most important profiles. And I don't know what's happening. Maybe I inserted the wrong information. You will always see this happens with these kind of sections. Let me just grab the previous search and walk through. I think there's a location issue. I'll just show you for the ease of it with the blockchain search that we also just did. So we actually have a good reference. And I'll check later what's wrong with the search that I just built. So we have blockchain, for an example, including all the technologies. We have the required location, which we can, for an example, say Sweden. I won't do Stockholm because I think it's the location issue. And then we'll say GitHub and Stack Overflow. Search from there. And then I will find those profiles real time. So it's a real time search. It's not like we've built up a database of profiles. Like you have a lot of solutions that build up databases with a limited set of profiles. But in this case, it's a real time search. So it searches GitHub and Stack Overflow real time. So as we are looking at it right now, it will search those platforms real time and gives you the best matching profiles. So here, for an example, we have the Stack Overflow profile, and here we have a GitHub profile, including all the information and the matching tags that we have included in our search. So for an example, if we want to check Johanzep's profile, we see the total breakdown of the actual skills that they have. And we can also get their contact details out. So just to begin with the actual screening of the information, so we have included here all the top matching skills, so Python, cloud, and all the experience and the actual experience level of the engineer. And if we like what we see, we can actually get their contact details out. And this takes around 7 or 8 seconds. And if we already have their contact details, in case of this GitHub profile, for an example, we can use that email to reach out with them based on our template. So this is an automatically generated template, including personalizations that you can set up from your template section. And based on this, you can literally send this message away in one click. And then Andreas will receive it based on their personal outreach or personal email address. So this is used to find a lot of profiles, obviously, very quickly, a lot quicker than, for example, the Google X-ray approach, and reach out to people in a highly personalized way based on their personal email address in most cases. I'm just going back to the chat and see if we have more questions. Feel free to drop your questions. Then we can take 20 more minutes to go, or 15 more minutes to go through those questions. So having used GitHub, any top tips on how to get around dev is using GitHub commit? Yeah, so I would say use the second approach. So use software that's dedicated to finding email addresses. You also have contact finder tools. So HeroHunt can obviously find your email addresses for you. For the software engineers, our hit rate of email addresses is about 90%. So in 90% of cases, you'll be able to find an email address. And if you want to use a standalone tool, you can look at the classic contact finders. So for an example, that's actually search GitHub as well. So some of them search GitHub and some don't. So for an example, Lasha, on the top of my head, searches GitHub as well. So these are the extension questions. You found a profile on Stack Overflow, but can't identify the same profile on GitHub, right? Yeah. So that's also a great question. Dot patch doesn't work like that on Stack Overflow, but you can use cross-referencing to find the profile in a different place. So what happens in a lot of cases is that on Stack Overflow, you will have a lot of different links listed by the developer. Sometimes there's a Twitter link, sometimes there's another link. And then based on that, you can actually cross-reference the information and go to the actual place where they have listed their GitHub profile. Because not in all cases it will be on Stack Overflow. But that's a way to find out their GitHub profile. But you can't do it directly from Stack Overflow. Thanks for that reply to the question of Lisa. That's also answered. Thank you, Julian. Can you re-explain the parameter of the GitHub block or report? Yeah, so block or report, that's something that we add. Block or report, that's something that we add to the Google X-ray string to be sure that we're searching GitHub users. So what we have here, for example, site, is the search string. This is for Stack Overflow. And we add this part because GitHub doesn't have an identifier for a profile page. So they don't have a /in or a /user. And that's why we have to use different information that we know that's on every profile page and not on any other page, like a documentation page or a repository page, to be sure that we find people instead of documents, for an example, or company pages. And that's why we add block or report to the Google X-ray. Where are we? Here. What email address do candidates receive the outreach from when using HeroHunt? So they will see it from exactly your email address. Thanks, Peter, for asking a question. So it will be exactly as when you send a direct email from your own email service provider. So for example, Gmail or Outlook. So they will receive it exactly as if you would directly email them. The only thing is that, a lot of the manual steps are automated in HeroHunt. So it facilitates the sending of the highly personalized email and automates that for a big part, but it won't interfere in the direct email contact between you and the candidate. So for the rest, it will be all the same. Lisa, can you filter somehow by seniority? That's a great question. So on Google X-ray, there's not really a way to filter on the right seniority. So that's, more like a guess than it's a filter. So there are some ways of guessing the seniority of a profile, but there's another way to filter profiles on seniority when you use the Google X-ray approach. What you can do in the Google X-ray approach is, for an example, obviously include something like senior developer. But the limitation of that is that, just like I said, something that you also have to take into account using software that searches GitHub and Stack Overflow, like HeroHunt, which we just saw, is that they don't use, senior backend developer, for an example, to name themselves. They position themselves a lot differently than on a different platform like LinkedIn. On LinkedIn, they would exactly state their job title. On GitHub Stack Overflow, they wouldn't. So that's also something to take into account in general, searching for GitHub and Stack Overflow profiles. What you can assume is using the keywords that you have on your profile. The more keywords that you have, and the more specific those are, and the more you play around with those, you can actually play around with those to see how senior the profiles are that you are getting in your search results. So that's one way of guessing the seniority, but there's not really a good way to filter on seniority. In Hero Hunt, I'll show you how that looks like. You do have some filtering on experience years, for example, because Hero Hunt also analyzes. So here you can actually include the experience years. Hero Hunt actually also analyzes the experience of the candidates. So you will see here, for example, TypeScript. Based on the GitHub data, so the underlying GitHub data, we know that Andreas has 1.5 years of TypeScript experience. And you can filter on that using the platform. But you have to be a little bit careful with seniority because, in many cases, the data that you need to accurately filter on seniority won't be available. Any other questions? Thanks for the questions so far. This is great. Makes for an interactive session. I love that. So much better than just sending a story out, right? We have 2 minutes left. I've planned 45 minutes for the session, just to be sure, so everybody can go out soon as well. I think the most important things we have discussed, just in summary, definitely check out recruiting on GitHub Stack Overflow, especially if you have a focus on tech recruiting. In the case of Google search, it will be a little bit more time consuming, but you will be able to learn a lot about how your search is affecting your search results. So it's a great place to start. Google X-Ray also gives you the ability to target quite well on keywords. And looking at developers, for an example, developer roles are typically very keyword focused, right? So I think Google X-Ray is still a great way of doing that. I've shown you how to find the contact details where you can assume they're verified contact details and they're typically the personal email addresses of the candidates. And that you can use that to also obviously reach out to the candidates. Something that I want to mention in addition to that is do take into account that the developers on the GitHub and Stack Overflow platform didn't necessarily put their information on the platform for recruiters to reach out to. So be respectful in the way you reach out to them. What we have seen working really, really well is that you show that you actually care about their profile and that you have took the time to look at the right information of the profile. So what I mean by that is to also refer in your outreach message, which with something like, I saw your extensive engineering experience, Python, parameter and cloud on Stack Overflow. I saw your extensive engineering experience, blockchain engineer and Python on GitHub. So also like Hero Hunt automates this. But if you do this on a Google X-Ray search and reach out from there, create your message in a way that you also refer to the fact that you have seen their GitHub profile or their Stack Overflow profile, that you have seen that they have the right skills and also mention them specifically. That really helps in getting a response. Also refer to their location, that you have seen that you, for an example, say something like, we have this blockchain role. It can be done from Sweden, Västerbottensland. My Swedish is not that well, sorry for that. But that's the location of the actual candidate. So if you refer to that, they actually know that it can be done from their hometown, for an example. Include those personalizations in your messages, and you will definitely see a jump in your response rates, whether you do it in the X-ray approach or via Hero Hunt. Via Hero Hunt, you can create your own templates. So you can create those templates, include those personalizations. So it makes it a little bit easier. But you can also use your own templates and then copy and paste the personalized information in case you're recruiting on X-ray with the X-ray approach. We have a couple of more additional questions. We have GitHub and Stack Overflow profiles. Therefore, Hero Hunt is a specialist for sourcing IT profiles, or is it possible to reach out to other sectors, education, finance, etc.? So, great question, Katrina. So, from a sourcing perspective, GitHub and Stack Overflow are the best sources for technical talent. Technical talent can be software developers, for an example. So, software developers you will primarily find on GitHub because they share code with each other. You have to be a software developer to actually develop that code, obviously. So on GitHub, you can primarily find software developers. But there are also, for an example, technical product managers who have a GitHub account that you can actually find using the techniques that I've shown you. And those technical product managers are on GitHub because they have been a software developer or because they are just very interested in software development and are checking out code repositories and profiles of developers. You can also find a lot of tech recruiters on GitHub, for example. So it can pay off to also find other profiles other than software developers on GitHub, and especially also on Stack Overflow, because Stack Overflow works in a way that people ask questions and they get their questions answered by IT specialists. So there are a lot of IT specialists who actually are also on Stack Overflow, who are not software developers, but who actually use the platform to get their technical questions answered. Education, finance. Just to continue on your question, Katrina. For education, finance, I would use different platforms if they are not non-technical. If they are non-technical, I wouldn't use GitHub and Stack Overflow to find talent. You won't be very successful. So what measures can we take to make sure that we aren't speaking to a 60-year-old kid in high school that's great at coding that is on Overflow or GitHub? That's a great question, Leo. So it depends a little bit on who you're searching for, right? If you're like, I would say skills-based oriented recruiting, so skills-based recruiting, that's what GitHub and Stack Overflow is ideal for, because you actually have the skills validation on those platforms. So they have written code, they have answered questions on Stack Overflow. So you know that they have actually been very busy and have invested a lot of time in getting acquainted with those technology skills. If it's still a 16-year-old who's checking all the boxes from a skills perspective, he might be your next hire in 2 years when he actually graduates or he skips high school. I don't know. But you can't filter on age, for an example. So my shortest question or answer to your question is build your search in a way that you know that you have filtered out the people who are inexperienced and who haven't shown enough evidence in terms of code repositories or valuable answers on Stack Overflow, and therefore you don't get them in your search results. But you're never sure. Last question from Craig, and if you have additional questions, please drop them in the chat. Your engineer outreach template seems to have a typo. It says IA rather than IE. Yeah, so IA is inter alia, that's Latin actually. If IE, you can also use obviously in the message. But thanks, Craig, for being sharp. I'll check that. I'll double check that from a grammar perspective in English. Thanks. Any more questions? Last questions? Drop them in the chat. If there are no questions, then I just want to share some resources with you, and I will also share most of them with you in the follow-up email that I will send you. I won't spam you. I will just send one follow-up email with the summary. So that's the cold email outreach messages that we have, since I've seen quite some questions about templates as well. Our free trial where you can try HeroHunt.ai. I'll look in the Stockholm issue of today. So just try it for your own use case, see how many people you can find and reach out to. The free trial allows also reaching out, so definitely try it out. And then we have a last question to close off this today's session. If we find company address email, what is your recommendation? Great question, Letitia. If you find a company email, I would say, and not a personal email address, because I think that's your question, I would say just carefully and respectfully use the company email address to reach out. It's still an email address. It's still a person behind that email address. It's the same person behind that email address. But just say something in your outreach message like, I couldn't find a way to reach out to you, but I still really wanted to, because I think you're just a great match and I wouldn't want this opportunity to go to waste. Something like that in your outreach message. So definitely, I would say definitely use it. It's not illegal. It's definitely not illegal. You can use that company email address also from a privacy regulation perspective. No issues. So just use it whenever you think it's valuable. Thank you, Peter. I hope also the rest has really enjoyed today. You've seen new stuff, practical stuff that you can actually use in your approach. Thanks, Greg. Thank you all for being here, and have a wonderful evening. Feel free to share all the information with everyone you know who's recruiting. I will send you the recording. I will send you some additional resources, and I see that you've been enjoying it. So thank you for attending, and all of your energy in the chat. That was great. I've enjoyed that as well. Thank you. Cheers.